So every so often I have people that come into the store that ask me why certain things aren't in the heavy metal section. Yeah, there's actually some people that'll come in that say that some bands that are in the pop rock section, probably for good reason, why they're not over amongst the pantheon of heavy metal greatness. Of course, I say all that because this is mainly a metal channel, and if I don't, people will probably be like, what the fuck? But it's time for us to actually have a serious discussion about this. It's time for me to kind of discuss why some of these groups are not in a heavy metal listed section at most stores. And I'm actually going to start this by saying kind of the reverse effect, because there are also some groups that are in the heavy metal section at some stores that probably shouldn't be. The very first one that I'm going to talk about is Linkin Park. Is Linkin Park metal? I don't think so, especially not lately. Lately, they've been post-bordering a little bit more on rap and hip-hop, so yeah, get that shit out of here, get that over in the pop rock section where it belongs. What about a band that, well, I guess establishes more of a punk sound, such as the Misfits? I don't think so. While most stores don't have a punk section anymore, considering it's largely a genre that has been divided into smaller subgenres and really been just kind of ravaged and destroyed from what it once stood for, this is one that is over in metal, I think, principally because of the thematic nature of some of the music. So that's definitely something to consider. But at the same time, I think a lot more people would find this if it was over in the pop rock section, simply because that's where most of the foot traffic is. But what about a band like Disturbed? Yeah, it belongs there. Band like Volbeat? Absolutely. And you know what? A band such as Shinedown? Ooh, no. I'm not quite sure why this is in the metal section of a lot of different stores, mine included. While these guys definitely have a harder edge to them, this is definitely more in the vein of classic rock. Consider some of the bands that they covered, and that really doesn't even make the half of the argument. Really, you just consider some of the music as a whole, and this definitely has a lot more of that modern rock friendly feel to it, while at the same time having itself a bit of an edge. Now, I don't want to really sin and say that these guys are kind of along the same veins as Nickelback, but sometimes truth is definitely out there, and while Shinedown is definitely a much better band than Nickelback, they do deserve to be in the same section as Nickelback. So let's talk about a couple of different bands and whether or not they should be in the metal section. So let's talk first about the Black Veil Brides. Metal or not? I don't think so. Face paint doesn't make you heavy metal. Just ask ICP. This is definitely a band that is more geared toward that whole glam rock phenomenon that we saw in the 1980s, following in the veins of bands such as Motley Crue, Poison, and all that stuff, only they've added some face paint to the mix. They still have big hair, they still have big riffs, but at the same time, they still are treating this as more of a rock-oriented environment. Sorry, Black Veil Brides fans, it ain't gonna happen. Blood on the Dance Floor? I don't even have to use the buzzer for that one. They just suck. Not to mention, they also deserve to be exactly where they're at. They'd probably be in a dance section if there was a dance section in my store, and if there's one in your area, that might be where you find them. But at the same time, should they actually be sold in stores at all? No, I don't think so. So let's talk about a couple of other bands that people have asked more so about. Because let's face it, Black Veil Brides and Blood on the Dance Floor, I don't get that all that often. Most people are willing to accept them for exactly where they're at. What about A Day to Remember? Hell no. These guys owe more of a debt to punk music than they do anything. And that whole pop punk phenomenon that has a little bit of a hardcore edge to it, well, those are three things that don't have one word in it, and that's heavy metal. Heavy metal's two words, but that's not really the point. Considering who these guys really owe their debts to, they're definitely in the right place, considering they're in the pop punk, or in this case, the pop rock environment, because pop is right there in the title. So yeah, no matter how heavy these guys get, they always owe more of a debt or an homage to hardcore music, and especially to pop and punk music. So they're exactly where they need to be. How about Five Finger Death Punch? Actually, yeah. Five Finger Death Punch deserve to be in the heavy metal grouping. And it really has absolutely zero to do with the fact that they are, a tremendously good heavy metal band, blah, blah, blah. In fact, if anything, I think they've gotten a little bit mindlessly generic over the past couple of albums. But this isn't one where we're talking about opinions. This is one where we're talking about the bar none facts. If you have a band like Volbeat over in the heavy metal section, then you definitely need to have a band like Five Finger Death Punch. It's modern metal, similar to what we saw with Disturbed and bands of that variety in the first part of the 2000s, and Five Finger Death Punch is heavier than Disturbed, for Christ's sake. And yeah, these guys definitely are a metal band, considering they do follow most of the guidelines. They do have a heavy sound, they do have an aggressive attitude, and not to mention, they also have all the formulations that you would need. just because it's a modern metal band that really gets a lot of, extended radio play, kind of a, radio metal band, if you really want to go that far, doesn't necessarily mean that it should be in the pop rock department. And really, if you're putting Five Finger Death Punch over there, there's a lot of other groups that probably should go there along with it, if really the pure basis is just that's where everyone's going to be, and that's where everyone's going to find it. It's kind of a stupid argument, and it's definitely one where this can go back and forth, but this is even labeled as pop rock on the labels, so go figure that one out. At the same time, should Dream Theater be in the pop rock department? I don't fucking think so. These guys are progressive metal. These guys definitely deserve to be over in the metal section, but I also appreciate the fact that they're in the pop rock department because it does give it a little bit of shine. But at the same time, these guys have more metallic properties than half of the bands that I've just listed, and they're doing things with a little bit more of a melodic edge. So, yeah, I really think that these guys deserve to be over in the metal section. Let's trade Five Finger Death Punch and Dream Theater for Linkin Park and Shinedown, if we were going to negotiate a trade between the pop, rock, and metal music sections. Does Limp Bizkit deserve to be over in the metal section? And don't worry, they're not. So this is a debate that we don't even have to have. Thank goodness. How about Kiss? They should be in pop rock. They're currently in the metal section. Doesn't matter how popular Kiss was. It doesn't matter what Kiss actually did for heavy metal music and hard music in general by basically having them be, one of the main principal aspects that perhaps made some parents a little bit uneasy about the heavier music genre with all the theatrics and the different things that they did on stage and all of this. This is classic rock music. This does not have the same edge that in the 1970s was being provided by bands such as, the earliest incantations of Judas Priest and Black Sabbath. You wouldn't put Black Sabbath in the classic rock department. Well, actually, you probably would, but back then, whenever heavy metal was just a budding subgenre, this was not something that you saw, so the earliest Black Sabbath stuff probably appeared in the rock department. But what about, Led Zeppelin? They're exactly where they need to be in the pop rock section. These guys are more fundamentally driven by the blues and blues rock and things like that. Now, while they do have a metallic edge to them as well, considering you could easily call Led Zeppelin to be as one of the original heavy metal acts, considering how heavy they can be, this is certainly one where they've crafted more so the whole entire rock landscape, more so than just heavy metal. And whenever you consider their blues roots, this is certainly something that emanates through a whole hell of a lot more. Now, you might argue with me and say that Black Sabbath had a lot of blues roots as well, and you're absolutely correct. However, whenever you examine the musical value of Black Sabbath versus Led Zeppelin, you definitely hear a more sinister and dark-themed edge to Black Sabbath's musical sound, whereas you still have some of those themes being examined with Led Zeppelin, although not that often. But now we get to the meat of the order. Now we get to the ones that are actually halfway relevant, because these are the ones that I get all the goddamn time. Sleeping with Sirens? What about Falling in Reverse? You gotta say Pierce the Veil. What about Nickelback? Holy son of a fuck, why aren't any of these bands there? What about Attack Attack? Oh man. Yeah, I actually might have to say yes on this one. Yeah, they've infused dubstep with heavy metal, but they are heavier than a sumbitch. But, nah, I can't do that. What about Hatebreed? Okay, whoa. Hatebreed does deserve to be in the metal section. That was just kind of a false flag there. They're actually in pop rock, in case you've never found them. That's where they're at. It's really stupid, it makes no sense, but considering it's more of a hardcore label as opposed to a metallic label, this is one where the straws get cut pretty thin. There's going to be a lot of different hardcore groups that are going to be found in the pop rock department as opposed to the metal section, because much like punk, hardcore does not have its own section unless you have a gigantic store that is able to really, really label things correctly. But let's talk about all the others that were buzzed. Nickelback is pretty obvious, but I'm speaking more along the lines to the Pierce the Veils, the Falling in Reverses, the Sleeping with Sirens of the world. Those things where little 14 and 15-year-olds come in, find out that they're not in the heavy metal section, and immediately throw a fucking bitch fit. This is absolutely ridiculous. I can't believe that any of you guys would even think that this was a possible qualm. Think about this. These guys owe a whole big greater debt to the whole punk and hardcore philosophy than they do anything else, as well as a little bit of a piece of classic rock. All these influences are something that have brought their music together and brought them to where they are. Do you see Escape the Fate in the heavy metal section? Don't think so. Do you see Avenged Sevenfold in the heavy metal section? Well, you do in some stores, but in other stores? No. And really, Avenged Sevenfold deserved to be over there. Escape the Fate doesn't. And this is the same thing for Falling in Reverse and the other plethora of bands that I just listed. These guys all owe a tremendous, tremendous debt to a lot of the hardcore slash punk slash emo slash all of that different wave that came before them, which is all subtly an offshoot of hardcore or alternative music. Now, while alternative music perhaps has diminished into more of an independent philosophy with the indie scene really ramping up, this is really not something that you can totally 100% guarantee, considering alternative music has definitely taken on quite a different ideology here within the past 10 years. Now, what about some other metal groups such as Ghost or Graveyard? Is Ghost in the metal section? Actually, yes they are, and they should be, but what about Graveyard? Actually, that's only half right. The first album is not. The second album, rather, is. That's really confusing. Let me just settle this 100%, put Graveyard in the metal section, because even though they do have a little bit more of a debt to really pay to old school vintage classic rock, they kind of deserve to be over there. But going back to the bands that I've listed previously, this is something where I have to understand the youth a little bit more, and perhaps this is where the comments and what you say to me will help out a little bit more. But as far as I'm looking at this, and considering I've been listening to music for quite some time, anytime I hear any of this material, the very first thing that comes to my lips is, well, this is rock music. This isn't metal music. It doesn't matter what the makeup of the song is. It doesn't necessarily even matter that they have a couple of guitarists and they're growling their vocals or screaming their vocals and they're not just singing their vocals like they're fucking Chuck Berry. That doesn't fucking mean shit! What it does mean, however, is that they owe a tremendous gratitude to punk music and they owe a tremendous gratitude to hardcore music, both of which are in, guess what, the pop rock section. And rightfully so. Heavy metal music has a certain element of attitude that's definitely imposed to it, and while you can argue that these bands certainly do have a lot of attitude that perhaps would put them into that pantheon, it doesn't, also because of the subject matter. The subject matter also isn't all that important. Heavy metal has a very unique makeup, and it's something that can envelop a lot of different things. I mean, for example, how about Ellen or Lacrimosa, which are specialists of more of a classical edge? Yeah, they're in the metal section. That's another false flag. I'm just like playing with this thing. It's kind of fun. Why are they in the metal section, but all these other bands that have all this homage to rock and blah 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 aren't? How is a classical group more metal than this stuff? Well, consider some of the subjects, consider the sinister nature of this music, consider the way in which it's constructed, and then you'll get your answer. Because after all, Atreyu's in the metal section. No, they're not. And rightfully so. Some metalcore bands will actually find their way over there, but those that are more so on the fringe, they're going to stay in the pop rock section. And Atreyu's one of them. But Bullet for My Valentine, they're fine. They're in the metal section. Ah, shit. No, they're not either. And rightfully so. It's more of a modern rock idea. Remember, modern rock is not the same thing as metal. And modern rock is definitely where a lot of these bands that I've buzzed out of the metal section principally get their foundation in. Even though their rock side is perhaps minute compared to their influences from the punk and the hardcore scenes, this is certainly something that brings forth what the modern age is all about. The modern age does have a bit of a heaviness to it. We're not seeing a lot of this soft core stuff that we're hearing more so out of the indie side, and there's nothing that says that that stuff is any, worse or better than anything else, but it's definitely out there. Whenever you think of the indie scene, you don't necessarily label it immediately as alternative. You don't necessarily also immediately label it just as indie rock. There are subsections of everything. And basically all of those bands, basically all are part of a subsection of modern rock that has a punk influence, that has a hardcore influence, has been reiterated throughout the course of this video, and basically, because of that, are in the pop rock section. One final one. This should be obvious. The Offspring. They're in the fucking metal section, and that's just dumb. Hopefully this has cleared up a couple of things. I know it probably hasn't, because this is something that, for a lot of people, can be construed as just someone's opinion of whether or not they deserve to be in one section or another. And perhaps the whole entire idea that they're in the pop rock section as opposed to the metal section is just some company's opinion of where they belong. But whenever it really broils down to it, whenever you listen to the sound, and whenever you consider the debts that they owe to certain genres of music in the past, well, then you kind of understand it. Now, yes, heavy metal does owe a little bit to punk music, and that's mainly in the thrash philosophy. But whenever it comes to a lot of other things, they owe a lot to blues music. But do you see everything in the blues section? Absolutely not. Maybe what it's really time for a lot of these new age bands to do is to actually consider themselves something completely different. Kind of establish themselves as their own subgenre or sub-subgenre, or just try to make up a new genre altogether. considering this is some sort of hybrid affair that definitely seems to be causing a lot of confusion amongst fans. So just because you think that your band is a metal band doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to find them in a metal section. And really just because you think that your band is a rock band apparently doesn't mean that you're not going to find it in the pop rock section, in the case of, the Offspring. Hopefully this did clear some things up, and for now, coverkillernation, metal band? A fucking reviewer. I just love playing with this thing. Just do it again. And again. You're an asshole. Actually, I love you guys. See ya.